Hello, and welcome to the Dementia Capable webinar series provided by the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregiving in partnership with the Georgia Division on Aging Services. Before getting started, we advise having a pen and paper ready to write down any information and links to the resources as they are provided. Otherwise, you will have to view the webinar again to retrieve it later. You may pause the webinar now if needed. Remember that the link to the SurveyMonkey post test will be pasted onto the last slide. The post test will remain open for an indefinite amount of time. Please take it at your earliest convenience, though we encourage immediately following the webinar. A certificate can be provided when entering your email address at the end of the post test. Today's webinar will be Softening the End of Life Transition, presented by Dr. Lisa Esom. Lisa Esom, PhD RN, is the Executive Director of the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregiving and Pope Eminent Scholar at Georgia Southwestern State University. Dr. Esom was a professor of nursing and served as the chair in the GSW School of Nursing from 2007 to 2010. Prior to this, she served as the program coordinator of the RN BSN program at Macon State College in Macon, Georgia. She has served as an adjunct professor for the Clinical Nurse Leader Graduate Program at the Medical College of Georgia. Dr. Esom has been a registered nurse for over 30 years and devoted much of her nursing practice to addressing the mental and physical health needs of older adult populations. Dr. Esom completed her doctoral degree in nursing at the Medical College of Georgia in 2003. Postdoctoral education included end-of-life training. Certified in gerontology, Dr. Esom focuses her program of research on caregivers, military and dementia, end-of-life issues, aging, and health promotion in rural areas of the United States. She has been the recipient of many awards, including Teacher of the Year Award at GSW, and was selected as a Helen Fold Scholar recipient for the American Association of Colleges of Nursing Leadership Program. Dr. Esom serves on many collegiate committees and additionally has served on the Medical Assisting Board for South Georgia Technical College, on the Caregiving Advisory Panel for the U.S. Administration on Aging, the ARC Expert Panel on Respite Research, the Carter Center Task Force for Mental Health, and is a member of the American Society on Aging, Gerontological Society of Aging, and National League of Nursing. She was recently selected as the Reynolds Center of Geriatric Nursing Excellence Distinguished Scholar in Aging. Dr. Esom also serves on the board of the Southern Gerontological Society. Welcome, Dr. Esom.
So, I'm going to talk about the end of life and softening the end of life transition. Many times we struggle with what to say, how to help individuals and their families plan for a good death. Good communication is essential. Also, advanced direct loss and grief are important to discuss too within the end-of-life experience. So today we'll spend some time as we begin our session with a story. It links very interesting story of a young man seeking wisdom from a mountain guru. And he writes, "He sat silent for quite some time. Then I realized that I would need to speak. Father," I said, "I need to understand something about what it means to die before I can continue with my studies." He continued to gaze at me with his open, bemused expression. "Father, I want to know what a dying person feels. No one will speak with him, nor be open enough to permit him to speak about his dying." He was silent for 3, perhaps 4 minutes. I felt at peace because I knew he would answer. So in the middle of a sentence, he said, "Of course, table. We continued to gaze at each other for several minutes. I began to feel sleepy after my long journey to see him. I must have dozed off. When I woke up, he was gone. The only activity was my own breathing. I retraced my steps down the mountain, still feeling calm, knowing that his answer made me feel good, but not knowing why. I returned to my studies and gave no further thought to the event, not wishing to dwell upon it, yet secure that someday I should understand. Many years later, I was invited to the home of a casual friend for dinner, a modest house in a typical California development. 8 or 10 other guests, people I did not know well, and I sat in the living room, drinking scotch and bourbon, celery sticks, and raw cauliflower into a watery cheese dip. Conversation, halting, became more animated as we got to know each other and developed points of contact. Drinks undoubtedly also affected us. Eventually, the hostess appeared and invited us into the dining room for a buffet dinner. As I entered the room, I noticed with astonishment that a brown horse was sitting quietly at the table. Although it was small for a horse, it filled much of the large table. I caught my breath but didn't say anything. I was the first one to enter, so I was able to turn to watch the other guests. They responded much as I did. Saw the horse, gasped or stared, said nothing. The host was the last to enter. He let out a silent shriek, rapidly from the horse of his guests with a wild stare. His mouth formed soundless words. And in a voice choked with confusion, he invited us to fill our plates from the buffet. His wife, asserted by what was clearly an unexpected horse, pointed to the name cards, which indicated where each of us was to sit. The hostess led me to the buffet and handed me a plate. Others lined up behind me. I filled my plate with rice and chicken, sat in my place. Others followed suit. I was cramped, trying to avoid getting too close to the horse while pretending no horse was there. My dish overlapped the edge of the table. Others found other ways to avoid physical contact with the horse. Host and hostess were at ease as the rest of us. Conversation and lagged. Every once in a while, someone would say something in an attempt to revive the earlier pleasant, innocuous discussion, but the overwhelming presence of the horse so filled our thoughts with talk of taxes or politics or the lack of rain. Dinner ended. Hostess brought coffee. I can recall everything on my plate, yet I have no memory of having eaten. Frank and silent, all of us trying not to look at the horse, yet unable to keep our eyes or thoughts anywhere else. I thought several times of saying, "Hey, there's a horse on the dining room table." I hardly knew the host. I didn't wish to embarrass him by mentioning something that obviously caused me discomfort. After all, it was his house. What do you say to a man with a horse on the table? I could have said that I did not mind, but that was not true. His presence upset me so much that I enjoyed neither the dinner. I could have said that I knew how difficult it was to have a horse on your dining room table. That wasn't true either. I had no idea. I could have said something like, "How do you feel about having a horse on your dining room table?" But I didn't want to sound like a psychologist. Perhaps I thought, if I ignore it, of course I knew. I later learned that the host and hostess were hoping the dinner would be a success in spite of the horse. They felt that to mention it would make us so uncomfortable that we wouldn't enjoy our visit. Of course, we didn't enjoy the evening anyway. They were fearful that we would try to offer them sympathy they didn't want or understanding they needed. They wanted the party to be a success. They decided to try to make the evening as enjoyable as possible. It was apparent that they, like their guests, think of little else. I excused myself shortly after dinner and went home. The evening had been terrible. I never wanted to see the host and hostess again, although I was eager to seek out the other guests and learn what they felt about the occasion. I felt confused about what had happened and extremely tense. Yes, I was careful to avoid the host and hostess after that. I did my best to stay away from them altogether in our neighborhood. I decided to seek out the guru once more. Still alive, although nearing death, and he would speak only to a few. So I repeated my journey to him and eventually found myself sitting across from him. Once again I asked, "Father, I want to know what a dying person feels like. No one will speak with him or be open enough to permit him to speak about his dying." The old man was quiet, sat without speaking for nearly an hour. As he did not bid me leave, I remained. Although I was content, I feared he would not share his wisdom, but he finally spoke. Slowly. Horse, dining room table. It is a horse that visits every house and sits on every dining room table. Table of the rich, table of the poor, simple, and of the wise. This horse just sits there, but its presence makes you wish to leave without speaking of it. Leave, you will always the presence of the horse. When it sits on your table, wish to speak of it, but you may not be able to. However, about the horse, you'll find that others can also speak about the horse. Most others, at least, if you are gentle and kind as you speak. The horse will remain on the dining room table. For your repast, or the company of the host and hostess, or if your table or the presence of your guest. Do not make magic to have the horse to disappear. Of the horse, thereby render it powerful. Now, today we're going to be talking about how communication is really critical in the end-of-life transition. And communication is critical in all situations, but it has very special significance at the end of life. Today, our objectives are to discuss the importance of good communication in end-of-life situations and how to elicit life goals with individuals and learn how to be an attentive listener, examine factors influencing communication, discuss advanced care planning and advanced directives. Last, we will reflect on aspects of grief and loss. Communication with the patient and the family is a crucial requirement to success in the end of life. Terminal illness involves many players. Good communication skills are especially important in fields or careers that work directly with families, social workers, psychologists, nurses, agency aging staff, service providers of any kind, healthcare assistants that go into the home, and many more. I'd like to talk to you about some myths or untruths about communication. Let's look at those, and then let's see the reality of what is true. So the first myth, that we communicate only when we consciously and deliberately choose to communicate. The reality is that we communicate, we're not consciously aware that we are. Another truth, a myth or untruth, that words mean the same thing to our listener as they do to the speaker. In reality, words alone do not provide meaning. Interpretation of words, how others receive communication. Third myth is that we communicate primarily with words. The reality is the majority of the messages that we send are nonverbal symbols. Another myth or untruth is that communication is a one-way activity. False. The reality is that communication is a two-way activity. The last myth or untruth is that one can never give someone too much information. For that to be false, the reality is that people can feel overwhelmed when they receive too much information. If you are working with families, someone that has a family member that is dying, it's very important to communicate to the dying person as well as the family. You're going to be honest with them and truthful. You're not going to abandon them. You're going to respect their values, help them elicit goals. Talk for a moment about a listening. Now you need to sit with that family and meet with them, maybe separately from the family. You need to ask them questions like, what is the most important? What are their concerns? What would they like? Are they able to do those things? What are things that in comfort? All of them. What is important for you to maintain control over? What do you know about your illness or your disease? Anything else you would like? Of activities, music, art, reading, massage, touch. What kind of things provide peace to you or comfort? What are the most important relationships in your life? How and where do you want to live for the rest of your life? What spiritual or religious practices bring you comfort? I think you could understand from the way I'm going through and suggesting questions to ask patients and families to get them to talk about, make their life more pleasant in the time that they have left. Because it's only by asking these questions and receiving answers can you build a plan of care or service to meet the individual and family needs. At the end, what you want to hear later on in life, something like, "Oh, I really was sad to lose my mama, but her death journey was a positive experience. I will cherish those memories forever." Let's get back to our slide about the next piece you want to, when you explore with the families in your communication, is that you want to help them explore realistic options. What is available, what is not available. Get to know these through your conversations with them and your dialogue. So you'll let them know, too, that you're going to take time to listen, that you are going to answer their questions within a reasonable time and encourage their questions. And sometimes, you don't know what to do and you can't answer the questions. You'll be willing to seek out help. You don't have to know everything. Relax on that. Kind of ask yourself, what would I do if this were my family member? The ability to communicate influences or also, there are other things that interact and other variables we need to think about as we're carrying on these conversations. I'll put this on this slide. Sexual orientation may be affecting the conversation. The age of the person who you're speaking with, their ethnicity, and even their gender. So you need to be aware of those as you have these conversations. So communication is an ongoing, continuous, dynamic process. It includes verbal and nonverbal signals. Some of your nonverbal signals include like body language, eye contact, gestures, voice intonation. So I think about if I've had a conversation with my teenage child, they roll their eyes at me when I'm telling them something. They haven't spoken a word, but I certainly get a good impression and I get a message back from them. So it's important to realize that 80% of the communication today is nonverbal. Talk about listening being a very important part of communication, but remember when you're listening, present, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. When you're having these conversations, there are some guidelines that Buckman came up with that help to encourage conversation. First one is set the right atmosphere. In other words, get comfortable and relate to the family and to the family member that you want to spend some time with them. You want to have undistracted eye contact. There are some cultures that will avoid direct eye contact, and that's just as a way of respect. So you do need to bring and be culturally sensitive to that. Remember that interruptions are bound to happen when you're having a meeting. That's okay. Just focus back on the conversation as quickly as possible. You want to ask the family ready to talk, if they would like to talk, not forcing them to do that. You want to have benefit listening, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But sometimes we talk with the family, but we have a difficult time understanding people who are nearing death, and they're in the last final phases and talking with them. We struggle with that. So let me help you understand some of the things that happen when someone is experiencing that dying person. Towards the end, they may appear confused or disoriented. They may speak to people and see places that aren't visible to you. You may look up at the end of the bed and say, "Oh, Aunt Mary, it's been a long time." At the bedside, Aunt Mary is not there, but I assure you, to them, Aunt Mary is there. Research has demonstrated that perceptions are real and actual. I want you to get comfortable and know that these things can happen. That will ease this transition at the end of life. The person that's dying may also describe spiritual beings. They may describe bright light. They may tell you exactly when they're going to die. Some people will know this is the time. It's believed, and research has borne this out, that the person at that time is beginning to transition from this life. So, and it may be related back to what they did as a career. Because sometimes, if they traveled a lot, they may say, "I need to pack my bags," or "I need to get on the plane." A patient who has a boater, they talk about the tides going in, the tides going out. A rancher could talk about his horse waiting for him to take him for a ride. Sometimes the messages of the dying may be a symbolic communication to ask for permission to die or to let you know that the time is soon. Knowing that these things can happen, expecting them, will allow you to be more comfortable during that time and not feel strained. Talk more about attentive listening. I want to encourage people to talk. So, don't anticipate what they may say. Don't interrupt them either. Listen patiently until there's a break in the conversation. When you're encouraging someone to talk, do it verbally, but also do it for body language. Like when they're speaking, nod your head like you're understanding. Or use comments or say, "I see. Tell me more." Lean forward. Let them know you're interested in the conversation. Sometimes you can encourage them by maybe repeating the 3 words from their last sentence. or shocked by the diagnosis. Spur them to talk again. You may use reflection, clarify something. I understand what you're saying. You're feeling like so-and-so. Oh, you mean that. Sentence, but you're reflecting on what they've already told you. Then always use open-ended questions if you have a question, like, well, what does this mean to you? Being silent is also a good. When your dying person is silent, it doesn't always mean that they don't want to talk to you. It may mean that they're in deep thought about something painful or sensitive, without making them feel rushed. Now, there's been many times, because I'm a geriatric nurse, that I've sat by the bedside of a dying patient. I didn't say anything, and neither did they. They were felt that they were very comforted, presence there. Sometimes you may not know what to say. There are times when there isn't anything to say. So say nothing and just remain close. Your presence and your being with are vital forces. Don't be afraid to acknowledge your feelings. It's okay to say things like, it's difficult for me to talk about, or I don't know what to say. I feel like that. Usually the dying person is going to feel relieved because they sense that you don't feel comfortable, and you just voicing it brings it out in the open. It's no longer worse on the dining room table, talking about it. Sometimes patients will say, or their families, well, why is this happening to us? It's okay to say, I don't know. I wish I had an answer, but I do not have an answer. I want to avoid any misunderstandings. So if you'll say things gently, help me understand what you mean. That's a therapeutic way of eliciting that and getting more conversation from them that lets you clarify what's going on and what they need help with. Now, when you're an attentive listener, don't change the subject. What we do a lot of times is difficult conversation, but when you change the subject, it cuts them off, cuts them down. So you don't want to do that. You want to take time in giving advice. And I suggest that you don't give advice at all possible unless you're directly asked for it. But if you do give it, do it very unassumingly, such as if they ask you, well, come back with, have you thought about, and make suggestions rather than saying this is what should be done. You're not there to fix it for them. You're there to help them through this trying time and this difficult transition. The last thing I want to mention, it's on the slide, is encourage reminiscing. Opportunity to reminisce or tell their story, or talk about something in the past. What that does is that provides reassurance that their lives had meaning. Let's talk about factors that influence communication. I'm going to talk first about the client and the family side, and then I'm going to talk about the service provider side. So on the family and the client side, you have to be aware that family systems can influence that communication. There may be a lack of experience, say, death within a family. This could be a new experience for them. So that's going to affect how they communicate. There may be a lack of continuity among the caregivers, which actual or perceived. They could interpret information received maybe from the healthcare providers in different ways. So they aren't all on the same page, as we like to say. There could also be a perceived or real lack of support among the family members, and that contributes to feelings of stress and discord, and it affects communication. Also, the crisis of impending death in a loved one does affect a family member's ability to hear, going to have to repeat conversations. Gently remind. So let's move on and talk about financial and educational effects and influencing communication. Financial concerns definitely affect communication if they're worried about that, because about the payment of medical expenses, lost time from work. They may feel robbed. Educational level, ability of that family member or that individual to read. You want to make sure if you give them any literature to read, it's at a reading level that's comfortable for them. Sometimes there's too much medical information. In other words, it's done, talk about complicated treatment protocols or medical jargon. So we want to use lay terms as often as possible. And another thing to remember as far as those is that somebody could be very tired, physically exhausted. That could also influence their communication and their skills at this. So those are your physical limitations. Talk about coping in grief. For grieving, and I'm going to talk about the types of grief later on, but somebody that's getting ready to lose a loss, that can affect their ability to hear and to understand what you're saying. Somebody could be, in their coping, they could go through a present situation. They could be fearful. They could be fearful of a future without the loved one. Concerns about, well, what's going to happen after that? They may have spiritual concerns. There may be changes in family dynamics that are going to affect that coping and their understanding with communication. The person who is dying may have been the breadwinner in the family. They may have been the one that organized and balanced the checkbook, paid the bills, and roles are changing. And these uneven family dynamics affect the way that the end-of-life transition happens. Sometimes you find that patients and families have prognosis or information because they're trying to protect one another, and it's important to understand that. That conspiracy of silence must be addressed. I want to remind everyone that there are cultural influences in communication that we have to respect about. I would simply encourage honesty among the family members when they're discussing the treatment and the prognosis, and whether they're discussing it with each other or with the person who is. Dying is for a lot of people to watch, and they can feel very helpless. They watch their loved one lose independence and watch the decline. You want to be sure that you provide opportunities for those individuals to ventilate those concerns and share. That's why communication and having that open door communication pathway. We talked about the family. Let's talk about the flip side. Why is it so difficult for service providers, community partners that are providing those service, to talk about death and dying with families? Well, there are some things we need to realize, that the fear of our own mortality many times can influence our ability. Topic, maybe a lack of personal experience with death. Been on that journey before. So that makes it a little harder. For some, it's a fear of expressing emotion, showing tears in front of somebody else. I want to get into these kind of topics. It might be the fear of not knowing the answer to a question, whether to be honest when you do answer a question. Both of those things can sometimes be a barrier to open communication. So in summary, communication is complex, especially in advanced disease. The client and family must always be involved in this end-of-life experience. But considering the communication concepts I've discussed so far, help you understand that some of the barriers faced so that you can have an effective communication with those who are facing death themselves or their families. You can soften the transition at the end of life. I want you to hear from Mo. This is what she wants you to know. She says, there is nothing beneficial in a clinically correct death filled with super technology and proficiency. All I want is talk with me. Ask me how I feel about things. Don't make me feel that I'm facing this alone. Stay with me. Hold my hand. Cherish my life. Let me know how special I am. My fears and make me comfortable. Discuss my last wishes and ask me the hard questions about what I want done. I stop breathing or my heart stops. Allow me to grieve all that I have known. Help me be in touch with my physical and spiritual and emotional self. Most of all, listen. A letter that was written by a dying woman. Now you've heard her thoughts on what she needs from you. Sometimes the best knowledge we ever get is from the person who's living it and what they would like. Let's move on and talk about some issues and how we could honor what Mo was asking. Advanced care planning is a process of decision-making and the communication of those decisions between the person and their family, their friends, their healthcare providers that ensure that their choices are known, preferably long before a crisis situation or when they no longer can communicate their wishes. Advanced care planning helps identify and clarify their personal values and what they want, what their goals are about their health, medical treatment, how, where, and with whom they want to live the end of their lives, and puts in place concrete arrangements for services. Advanced care planning is a process of planning, particularly for the event when the patient is unable to make his or her own decision. It involves allowing the person to decide and designate they would like to make those decisions on behalf in the event they cannot. You know, when people communicate their wishes ahead of time, it really does decrease the chance of conflict, making, or ethical dilemmas, burden off of the family. There was a law, it's called the Patient Self-Determination Act, that requires healthcare institutions to tell patients or people coming into their institution what their state provides in the form of an advance directive. If you've ever gone into a hospital, or they'll ask you, have any advance directives, such as living wills and durable power of attorney for health care appointment. And I'm going to talk about those next. Advance directive, that is a written means for communicating your choices. This is where individuals plan and communicate their care and their treatment choices when they can no longer speak for themselves, and they are based on the individual's self-determination. Advance directive documents offer legal protection for one's rights. Their forms and the laws do differ by state, so you'll need to check with your state. They're good things to have in place when people are still competent and ready to be cognizant of what they would like. As we talk about two, one is living wills. Third, while the patient is competent, it describes their preference in the event that they become incapable of making decisions or communicating those decisions. Describes what type of life-prolonging procedures it wants, circumstances under which they would want these procedures to be carried out, or even withdrawn. Documentation of a living will, a copy should be in their home. Now, some people will tell you that you need to put it in a place. There's something called a vial of life. Those are available. Some people will put those on the front of their refrigerator. Click it to that, but a refrigerator, as you know, is an item that does not burn in a house fire. So many will put it inside on the door of their refrigerator. Make sure, and paramedics and people that come in, or EMTs that come into the home on a rescue mission, many times will look in the refrigerator because a lot of people leave them there. You do need a copy in the home. Healthcare provider to have a copy. And if you go to a hospital, you need to provide them with that. Copy needs to be with your proxy. Talk about that proxy. That's a durable power of attorney for health care. It's a document that specifies what powers that you might want to give to a person that's holding that power of attorney. It might include arrangements for consent to medical, therapeutic, surgical procedures, including the administration of medications and other drugs. They will make the decision in the event that you cannot speak for yourself. The person is chosen with great care and consideration. They will be making those final decisions. I have to talk about loss and bereavement when we talk about the end of life and planning for that. Many times the situation at the end of life is smoother when you've done the advanced care planning, have open ways and means of communication. But loss, grief, and bereavement affect everyone. Affect everyone, because everyone will grieve in their own way. Grief is a process. Grief actually begins before the death of an individual because they anticipate they will experience the loss. Grief may continue for the survivor, the loss of the individual. The grief process is not always orderly and predictable. Stages or tasks that the survivor moves through to help resolve the grief. All that grief work. No one really gets over a loss, but he or she can heal, live with a loss. Grief is the emotional response to a loss by the dying person themselves, survivors. Bereavement includes grief and mourning. It takes for the survivor to feel the pain of loss, to mourn, to grieve, and adjust to a world without the physical, the psychological, social presence of those that have passed on. Now, we must all be aware of cultural characteristics of grief. Different cultures grieve in different ways and have different opportunities to express that grief, and we need to honor and respect those. Let's briefly just review the types of grief. Anticipatory grief is grief before a loss. We said that earlier. Maybe when you get a diagnosis, chronic or acute illness, grieving before the loss actually occurs. What are some examples of the loss? Well, it might be that you're fearful about the loss of health. It may be a loss of independence. It could be a loss of a body part that's going to have to be removed. Worried about losing independence. Anyway, it occurs before the loss actually occurs. Normal grief. What are the normal feelings and behaviors and reactions to a loss? Physical, cognitive, behavioral. And there is complicated grief. There are 4 types of complicated grief. The first one is chronic grief. Chronic grief is characterized by normal grief reactions that do not subside and continue over very long periods of time. Chronic. Delayed grief, characterized by normal grief reactions that are suppressed or postponed. The survivor consciously or unconsciously avoids the pain of the loss. Exaggerated grief is the third type. The survivor is self-destructive and has self-destructive behaviors such as suicide. And the last type of complicated grief is masked. The survivor is not aware that behaviors that interfere with normal functioning are a result. I want to mention disenfranchised grief. We don't always think about this, but this is a grief that's encountered when the loss is experienced, but that it cannot be openly acknowledged, socially sanctioned, or publicly shared. What is that? It might be an ex-spouse. It could be an ex-partner, lover, mistress. At any point, this cannot be openly acknowledged and shared, but the grief is real, and it's called disenfranchised grief. Now, even though you know the types of grief and you can understand that, I see that most times we struggle with what do we say? What kind of comment can I make? I don't go see people some people will say, well, I don't go see anybody for visitation at death because I don't know what to say. Well, I want to help you feel comfortable because this softens that transition at the end of life. I'm going to unhelpful comments, and then I'm going to replace them with helpful comments. So an unhelpful comment, say to someone, I know exactly how you're feeling. I know exactly how they are feeling. That's unhelpful. A better way to say would be, I am sorry that you're going through this painful process. Another unhelpful comment, I can imagine how you're feeling. So you really can't. A more helpful comment would be, it must be hard to accept. Another unhelpful comment, I'm always here for you. Call me if you need anything. Better comment, I can bring dinner over Tuesday or Friday. Which day will be better for you? Particularly in the South, I see that as we ask, how are you doing? And they say, fine. And they say, well, what can I do to help you? They say, I've got it. So it's better now, maybe now you can understand why it's better not to say, I'm always here for you, call me if you need anything. Better to be direct and say, one will be better for you. Another unhelpful comment that we hear from time to time is, well, you should be over it by now. So lucky. Time that you moved on. A more helpful comment would be that, grieving takes time. Don't feel pushed. Hurry through it. Process. Another unhelpful comment that you hear from time to time, oh, you're young, you'll meet someone else. So a better helpful comment is to tell them, well, ask them, what's the most scary part about facing the future alone without whatever his name was? Talk about Sam. If you've lost loved ones, I like to talk about those people. More difficult when you avoid talking about them. In another conversation, you can acknowledge that they had a long and full life. The more helpful comment, the person that's the survivor, the person that's grieving, is to say, it's not easy for you, is it? With me about your relationship, the thing that you're missing most. Let's talk about Sam. I want to conclude today with a short poem or writing about the elephant in the room. It goes like this. There's an elephant in the room, large and squatting, hard to get around, that we squeeze by with, how are you, and I'm fine, 1,000 other forms of trivial chatter. Talk about the weather, we will talk about work, talk about everything else except the elephant in the room. There is an elephant in the room. All know it is there. We're thinking about the elephant all together, constantly on our mind. For you see, it is a very big elephant. Hurt us all. Not talk about the elephant in the room. Oh, please, say her name. Oh, please, say Barbara again. Oh, please, let's talk about the elephant in the room. But if we talk about her death, perhaps we can talk about her life. Can I say Barbara to you and not have you look away? Or if I cannot, room. So I want to encourage you now, at the end of life situations, talk about the elephant in the room. Speak of the horse that's on the table. Because in doing so, we remove those barriers for the dying individual and for the families that we are providing service to. Make a positive experience often the end-of-life transition. Thank you. I've enjoyed our time together today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Esom. It was such a pleasure, and thank you for sharing how we can soften the end of life transition. I just want to remind that the link to the survey post-test is on this last slide. Please take it at your earliest convenience. A certificate can be provided by entering your email address at the end of the post-test. Please remember to view the other webinars in the Dementia Capable webinar series provided by the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregiving in partnership with the Georgia Division on Aging Services. Thank you, and we hope that you'll join us again.